practically we do, but something we like to know about is cohort studies, which tell us about prognosis. What's going to happen to the patient that you have, right? So we'll say a little bit about cohort studies. Patients ask us this. So these are the objectives, and this is what we'll go through. So, I mean, I decided to put up a little scenario, and the scenario just describes a case. You could read it. Routine examination, he detected grade 2 systolic murmur on a 9-year-old boy, and he admits to having episodes of fatigue, difficulty competing. He had an echo, and it showed that he had a bicuspid aortic valve, and the person doing the scan commented the unfortunate boy will eventually have heart failure. So looking at this case, this scenario, which may be true or not, if you had to think about asking an answerable question from the point of prognosis, where prognosis is concerned, how we'll phrase that question and how we'll ask it. We saw what PICO is for treatment. The patient with a disease does comparing one treatment against the next to make the patient better. We saw what PICO is for diagnosis. And the patient who may have a condition, does one test compare against the gold standard, make the diagnosis, the outcome. What's PICO for prognosis, you think? Prognosis, what we're trying to predict, what we're trying to figure out is the outcome. In this case, heart failure. So that's kind of easy. What's the P in this case? What kind of patient? Pediatric patient. You could say 9-year-old children or 9-year-old boy, a pediatric patient. So where's the I and the C? Normal and abnormal, that's right. So in a 9-year-old boy, does exposure in, not in the literal sense of the word, abnormal, bicuspid is abnormal. Valve compared to having a normal valve lead to heart failure. So the I and C for prognosis are simply risk factors, right? So we'll see for prognosis as well as etiology next week that the I and the C in PICO is simply risk factors. So there are different ways we could ask these questions. An adult, does smoking compared to no smoking lead to cancer? In an adult, does obesity compared to no obesity lead to MI? Right? So there are different ways, many different ways we could ask PICOs, but for prognosis, the outcome is what happened to the patient, and the I and the C are different risk factors. So again, if I just had to ask you all just to say, we're not going to actually do it. If I tell you, I'll find some papers, find some articles on this, do a literature search. How you'll search, how you'll look for this. Or you'll search for in Google or PubMed or whatever. Any ideas? Bicuspid aortic valve, heart failure, yeah. You might find some papers. You might find papers looking at treatment. You might find papers looking at diagnosis. So it may be that you probably may want to look at a cohort study. So make a limit specific to cohort. Or if you go into clinical queries, actually there's prognosis. Because prognosis and clinical queries, it narrows it down, right? So we're actually not going to do a search, but that is essentially what we'll do. Schematically, this is what a cohort study always tries to do. It takes a group of people with a risk factor and follow them up over time to see who wants to get sick. And then it takes a group of people without the risk factor and also follows them up over time to see who wants to get sick. Right? So this in a nutshell is what a cohort study does. It always compares a group of people who are exposed, who have the risk factor, with a group of people who do not have the risk factor. That's simply what all cohort studies do. Now, if we just look at the cartoon, you could probably maybe barely see it, that some of these guys are colored. They are both blue and red. So these are the ones who developed illness, they got sick. So here we see we had 5 people that were healthy, everybody were red. And then after you follow them up over time, these smokers, 6 out of the 5 got sick. So we could see 60% of smokers get sick. All right, that's what you would get. And if they didn't have the disease, and you follow them up over time to see who's going to get the disease, that measure that we report is called, over a period of time, the number of new cases of anything is incidence. So cohort studies tell us incidence. They tell us how much new cases we're going to see. If we look at a group of people, though, who were non-smokers, and we did the same, we followed them up over time as well. And the question you ask is, well, how much of them get sick? Look, 1 of them gets sick, 1 out of 5. Then you'll see 20% of the non-smokers getting sick. Now, I just saying getting sick in terms of just using it loosely. That could be getting an MI, it could be developing lung cancer, it could be developing diabetes, whatever the outcome is. We don't know what it is. But in a cohort study, you usually look at an outcome and you usually try to see what were the risk factors that determined if that outcome was going to occur. So here you could say 60% of smokers get sick, and here you could say 30%, 20%, sorry, of smokers get sick. So what are you thinking? You thinking smoking associated with getting sick? Yeah, because it have more smokers getting sick compared to non-smokers. So that's the first thing you'll think. You'll say, all right, in this case, if you saw equal numbers of people getting sick in both groups, then you'll say, well, smoking is probably not associated. So what a cohort study could prove is association. Causation, we'll see next week, you have to take some further steps to say that something causes something. But if one of the major steps in proving causation is to first prove that something is associated. Right? So these studies could prove association, but association isn't always causation, as we know in medicine. We'll hear it again next week. Right? So this is what a cohort study tries to do. Now, can't a RCT answer this question? Can't a randomized controlled trial answer the question? You know? How ethical would it be? Take a group of people who don't smoke, randomize a group of them start smoking, randomize a group of them remain off the cigarettes. Can we do that in research? Can we do that for any risk factor? Can I take a group of healthy people, normal BMI, and randomize a group to obesity? Nope. Yeah, what's all there? Make sure and get fat. And then tell the group, maintain all your BMI, do not get fat. We can't randomize people. So because we cannot randomize people to risk factors, it's unethical. Some just plain impractical. Some of them you might think, well, I wonder if we could really do that. It would be unethical, right? So for that reason, to look at the effect risk factors, bad things that people do have, the effects on their life, the only way you could do it really is with cohort studies. Where cohort studies is in the hierarchy evidence. Anyone remember? CIS reviews, RCTs, cohort studies are just below, right? Right below. So the easiest way is just to observe people and see if people with certain risk factors get it. So now let me pick an next one, a topical one these days. H1N1, vaccines, dying from influenza. That will always make news around this time every single year. We go through the same thing over and over every year. What would be the best way to know if the flu shot has really stopped people from dying from influenza? A RCT or a cohort study? Why not a RCT? Can we randomize people to get the flu shot or not to get the flu shot? It depends on when you're talking about. If it was maybe 20 years ago and nobody had the vaccine and we had to do a test to see if it's work, then definitely you would say, well, yeah, because RCTs is actually what initially proved that the flu shot prevents disease in certain high-risk groups. But now that we have the vaccine and the ministry is saying, well, everybody go and get, it would be unethical for me to take a group of people and randomize them and say, here, all you have to get no flu shot. And then take a group of people and say, all you're going to get the flu shot. It might be kind of unethical, right? So the best way maybe to look at something like that right now at this point in time might be a cohort study. So the Minister of Health tell everybody get this thing. In reality, it have the vaxxers and the anti-vaxxers. So you could just go in a community and say, oh, you get a shot, yeah, you get a shot, yeah, you get a shot, no, yes, yes, yes. And then say, all right, I'm just going to follow all up over the next year to see how much times you are going to get sick. That would be a cohort study, right? Just to show, we have been doing this and saying this all the time, but just to put it into perspective, when we look at clinical research, it falls into two groups. Either we intervene or we're not intervening, we're just observing. So if we intervene as we do in an interventional study like a randomized controlled trial, then of course we call it a randomized controlled trial. If we intervene and it wasn't a randomized trial, then you would say, well, it wasn't randomized. So you might tend to think, well, how we could test the intervention without randomization? Because I told you all randomized controlled trials is the best way to test a treatment. I was asked to be the judge in NCRHA's research day last week. And one of the things that was presented, a psychologist who I know well, presented on an online intervention. She designed herself something mindful and meditation based to see if it could relieve anxiety and depression scores. So she took a group of people who have anxiety or depression, and then she tell everyone, go and check out the site, do the exercises, do the homework, do everything every week. And after come back in a week, and she measured anxiety and depression scores in everybody. And she found that this thing worked when she made people, use this website, which guided them through certain things. It made a significant difference in the group of people. There's only one group of people, everyone did it. In the end, compared to the beginning, everyone got better. So of course, one of my questions as a judge is she said she would have to repeat the study using, better sample sizes and better sample techniques. So I ask her, well, how you have to repeat the study? What does you do? What kind of study? She said, I'll use more people. I said, all right, that's good. I'll use more people because she had 21 people in her study. That was the whole study. I say, yeah, 21 people, that's good. But to know if this thing really works, and you have to give a group of people it. And then you have to give a next group some other standard of care, whatever else we do for meditation, for anxiety and depression, apart from meditation. So you could do experimental, sometimes research and intervene without it being a RCT. That's what I'm telling you the story, right? That explains why you could do an interventional study without randomization. Of course, you could bet the strength evidence from that is really, really, really low, right? So sometimes people do research and they just do it before and after in one group of people. Well, these people that had blood pressure, we give them a treatment drop. That don't mean that treatment work and it's the best one to give. You have to compare it with something, right? And what we're talking about today and next week is when we do research, we do intervene. A cohort study, all we do, you get a shot, you didn't get a shot, we're just going to watch you. We're just going to observe. So that's why we call it observational studies. And observational studies are usually two types. It could be descriptive, in which case we do a simple survey. You want to know what's the average wait times in your emergency room. You go next week, you just take a survey. I've seen some people laughing. You already know the average wait times in the emergency room. We don't need to do that. You all did it. What you all found? Of course. Sure. To be triage. That's when they first presented to when they see the triage nurse. Right. Yeah. It was about that. Right. So what you did there was a descriptive study. Because all you're trying to do is just describe. You just want to see what is happening. And the other word for descriptive study is a cross-sectional study. So anytime we try to work out prevalences or something, we just want to get one measure to describe what's happening in practice. We call that descriptive studies and cross-sectional studies, which is probably the study design most of us did in medical school when we did our year 2 research. I still remember mine. We did a study looking at bottled water. It was a popular thing at the time. And we just went through Trinidad randomly, just picked bottled water off the shelf and just tested to see if it had bacteria. We found that 5% of all the bottled water in Trinidad at the time, a long time ago, was considered unsafe for human consumption. It had bacterial levels that were elevated. 1% of the bottled water, I wouldn't tell it on record, I'll tell it after, right? When we stop recording, right? When we stop recording, right? 1% of the bottled water actually had coliforms in it. And WHO says you're allowed to have a certain amount of bacteria in the water if it's not certain types, but WHO says 0 tolerance for coliforms. You should have no coliforms in potable drinking water. Right? Right? So interesting. So when we do studies like this, they're not without merit, but if you notice, we're not really talking about this in this course EBM, right? When we do studies like this, they are simply descriptive or cross-sectional. You try to work out the prevalence or something, you just want to know where it is going. When we do observational studies and there's a comparison, we're comparing two groups. You want to see if there was an association between diseased and non-diseased people and a risk factor, or we want to see if there was a difference in outcomes across risk factors, then we call those analytical studies. Right? So this just kind of gives you a classification of research in medicine. This is by no means complete. There are many other types of research designs that we use in medicine that we intentionally not speaking about in this course for you all. But this is the popular ones that you would need for clinical practice. So is a cohort study prospective or retrospective? What do you think? Prospective? Either or, yeah, both. Some people say it could be both. So this would be a prospective study. Prospective is somewhere on top by the bar that Zoom is on. When it goes away, you wouldn't see it. But this one is a prospective cohort. Oh, look at it, prospective cohort, right? So this means that here the risk factor is present, black, and white is the risk factor is absent. So an investigator up here, let me just pick smoking for simplicity, and have some people who smoking, some people who not smoking. The investigator up here, and he's going to follow people over time to see who's going to get cancer. That would be a prospective cohort study. Right? So a prospective cohort study does that. But you could also do a retrospective cohort study if the investigator appears after disease has occurred. So you appear and people either had smoking or they were not smoking, and they developed the disease. Some people already had cancer and some people didn't have cancer. If you look back and you separate people based on the exposure status, smokers or non-smokers, and then went forward in their notes to actually see if they got the disease, it is still a cohort because they're separating people based on exposure. Anytime you separate two groups based on exposure or risk factor, you're thinking this could be a cohort study. But because the outcome has already occurred, then it would be a retrospective cohort. What makes any study retrospective is if the investigator appears after the disease has happened. So that would be a retrospective cohort. Right? So a cohort study could actually be both. Right? Of course, a prospective study you have to start now and move forward in time to see what happened. A retrospective study means you have to go back and look in the charts to see what happened before. There are slight pros and cons to each, but no, a cohort study could be both. Can a cohort study prove the efficacy of a treatment? We kind of just spoke about that when I asked you all if we could look at a cohort study to see if the swine flu vaccine really working. And you said, yeah, well, we do a cohort study. So if we did a cohort study now this season, flu season in Trinidad, we looked at a group of people who got the shot and we compared to people who say, I don't need no vaccine. And we follow them up over the next year to see who's going to get and the viral pneumonia and end up in the hospital. We just say as the outcome. Can such a study prove that getting the flu shot really makes a difference? Why I say no?
That it's associated, it have like other component factors that cause it to just happen.
It could be that something else about other people who want to go for the flu shot doing that's stopping them from getting sick. And people who don't care and who not going for the flu shot, probably they're doing other things that make them get sick. How we know for sure is their decision to take the flu shot is what is associated with the outcome. So the initial answer is yes, but there's a huge but to it, and that is what you all just highlighted. Certain exposures to go together. So if the exposure was being diabetic, and we want to see if people who are diabetic versus people who are not diabetic, if they're more likely to get blindness or cataracts. You might say, well, what else goes with diabetes? Hypertension, obesity, other things. How we know is not those things causing the person to get the cataracts and not the diabetes. That's an example. Of course, we know diabetes could lead to cataracts. But that's the thing. If it was smoking, the exposure, what else goes with smoking? Maybe alcohol, poor diet, not seeing about yourself, not taking exercise, exactly. Was that? Bad choices on the whole, most correct. That's right. If the exposure was eating healthy, what else goes with eating healthy? Exercise, other health-seeking behaviors that makes a person healthy, right? So that is why generally cohort studies cannot really be used to tell us how to treat, right? So look at this study. This study was an interesting study. This was a cohort study. They wanted to see the impact of statins on the risk of developing diabetes. This is something that has come up in the last couple of years. I'm sure you all have read it, that statins give people diabetes. I've had patients even go on the internet and read about it, and they come and ask me, Doc, you give me Crestor? I hear that thing is called sugar, boy. You know, I know my cholesterol high, but I mean, yeah, so this thing is caused diabetes. So this was a cohort study. So let me look at this cohort study and see why it is they're not really good at proving treatment or even adverse outcomes, right? So this was a group of statin users. It was 94,000 of them. Look at that, plenty of people. And this was the group of non-statin users. Now, keep in mind, this wasn't the RCT. This was a cohort study. So they didn't intervene and give the statin users statins. They were already on it. And they didn't intervene for these people. These are people who were not taking statins. So this is kind of like the table of baseline characteristics. And in the table of baseline characteristics, we're supposed to see p-values that are non-significant. You're supposed to see p-values that are more than 0.05, meaning the two groups were similar. Is that the case here? No. Almost all the features show that the groups are really, really different, except for gender, exactly. So gender, it had 44%, 44.8%, what is this? males, right? They reported on males, and 44.6% males. So the gender was almost the same. But that is probably where all the similarities end. If you look at the age, look at that. Was age different? 60.8 and 60.9. You all find that different? Average age. Not really, but look at the p-value. So that means that this test that they did said that there was a difference in the 60.8 and the 60.9. To me, there is no difference at all. There is no difference at all. If you tell me one group was 60.8, one group was 60.9, what I mean, they were different by what? How much weeks? That has no effect to me really on the risk of developing that. Now, if one group, the starting users, was 60 and the non-starting users was 40, then I can say, well, all right, they were clearly much different. That happened in this study because of the sample size, because it had such huge numbers of people. Because it was so big, sometimes when you have huge studies, it's actually not always a good thing for statistical tests, because sometimes you find small differences to be statistically significant. And that's what tends to happen. But if you move away from the age in that case, if you look at hyperlipidemia, 40% of the statin users were hyperlipidemic compared to 8% of the non-statin users. That's surprising? Exactly. Let me look at heart failure. 3.1% of the statin users had heart failure, and 2.5% of the non-statin users had heart failure. We could say they had statistically more people in statin users having heart failure. Let me look at kidney disease. Kidney disease wasn't really much different. Cardiovascular disease, 11.6% had cardiovascular disease, whereas 7.3% had CVD in the non-statin users. Again, not surprising, right? So the problem with it is, when we look at these things in a cohort study, often see differences between the groups because the groups were not arrived at through randomization. If randomization was used to produce these groups, they would be very similar. That's why a cohort study is below a RCT in the strength of evidence, because a cohort study is much more prone to confounding than an RCT. An RCT eliminates confounding through randomization, right? So just to emphasize the point. So the other thing is, if I ask you, can any of these factors result in a person developing diabetes? Hypertension, heart failure, PAD, MI, CKD, hyperlipidemia. Can any of these things increase the risk that a person will develop diabetes? I mean, you could always argue diabetes, syndrome X, metabolic syndrome, these things go together. Right, that go together. So if you're saying, well, it had more hypertensives, look at that, 57.8% in the statin users compared to the non-statin users. So all we know is the hypertension is going with diabetes. All we know is that the hypertension is the reason people become diabetic. Can you think of any other characteristic or risk factor not on this slide that would increase the chance that someone will develop diabetes? That's not on this slide. That's not in the table. Family history, PCOS, weight, obesity, exactly. And those, I don't know, at least according to this table, they would measure. So sometimes in cohort studies, sometimes not all the confounders are measured. The only time you look on the table of baseline characteristics for a cohort study, first thing, note, were they different? Often they are. And two, ask yourself, did they consider all the confounders? Sometimes they don't consider all. Right? This study showed a link. So if you had to answer a patient, doc, that the statin is caused diabetes, what kind of study you look at? Statins, to answer the question, the statins cause new onset diabetes. You look at randomized control trials. And the randomized control trials tells us, yes, it does increase the risk that a person will develop diabetes, but the numbers needed to treat, you all remember that thing? Is about 300 over a period of time of 3 to 5 years. So we need to treat 300 patients with a statin for one extra case of diabetes to develop if the people use the statins over a 3-year period. Not so bad. Generally, when we make a decision to give a patient a statin, is because they're at risk of cardiovascular disease. And we always say, at least we know now the benefit of taking the statin because of cardiovascular disease way outweighs the potential risk of development of diabetes. So when patients ask me, I tell them, I said, yes, it does increase the risk, but about for every 300 people who take the statin drug, you'll get one extra case of diabetes. If I tell a person that, then they'll say, well, it don't probably seem so bad, you know? Yeah. Or is that? Or they might say bad lucky. Yeah. I sometimes tell them that. I say, if you come back and you tell me you get this, when they read up and look at the side effect, I can really tell you you're bad lucky. I will really tell you bad lucky, because if the chance of side effect is 1 in 10,000 and you get it, you're really bad lucky. You're really bad lucky. Hopefully that patient doesn't develop the side effect. They'll come back and, you know. So just emphasize again the hierarchy evidence, where it is, right? There are a few cohort studies that are popular. Some of these you may have heard about. WHI is the one that looked at in women, postmenopausal women. What do you call it? HRT, hormone replacement therapy, and see if people got sick, if they got cancer, breast cancer, cervical cancer, endometrial cancer, ovarian cancer. We know that now because of this. There was a study done in Great Britain called Millions Women Study. Guess how much people they follow up? 1 million women. And the study showed links between obesity and all forms of cancer. Again, it showed links with obesity and cancer. It doesn't mean obesity causing cancer, but it showed links with obesity and cancer. Framingham, we all know from medical school. Framingham told us about heart disease risk factors. Imagine before the 1950s or 1940s, it wasn't common knowledge that high cholesterol and smoking and high LDL and obesity and diabetes is what people have attacks and strokes. Imagine at the time we did not know that. Imagine that. Now that's common knowledge. Everybody know that. I don't know if you all know the equivalent in Trinidad, the Trinidad Framingham study. Of course, there's no place called Framingham in Trinidad. Framingham is an actual place, for those of you who don't know, a physical location where the study was done. But our equivalent of Framingham was the first cohort study done in Trinidad ever. Some cohort or research in Trinidad trivia. Anyone knows it? The St. James study. So the St. James study was done in the 1970s, and it was our equivalent of Framingham. They followed up about 2,000 people in this area of St. James over time, and they saw that the traditional risk factors that Framingham saw, we also saw in our setting, making people get MIs and strokes. Right? So you should know of it. Right? St. James. Look up the St. James survey, you'll see. That was the first cohort study ever done, at least ever done and published in Trinidad. Right? Right now in my unit, Professor Rohan Maraj, he is actually doing a cohort study funded by Yale, right, at NIH, National Institutes of Health. And they're doing this thing for the last 7 years. What they're doing is they're looking at a cohort study of about 2,000 people in Trinidad, and they're following up over time to see risk factors for people getting sick, certain illnesses, right? So NIH has interest in the small Caribbean islands because they recognize that we are like a minority population group, not representative of the population in the States. So they have vested interest in doing this thing. So they fund this study in Trinidad, in Barbados, in USVI, and in Puerto Rico. So the hope is to enroll 5,000 people in the Caribbean over the next couple of years to see what making Trinidadian and people in these other populations get sick, right? So they are doing cohort studies in Trinidad. But it takes lots of effort and time, right? And you could imagine it's expensive. Imagine following up 1 million people, right? So in terms of, if my slide will advance, I don't. When we go through the critical appraisals next week for cohort, that'll be the last rounds of critical appraisals. We asking the same questions we asking all the time for critical appraisals. Was it valid? Was it important? Can we apply it to our patient? So when you do a cohort study, you should grab a group of people at an early point, meaning a group of people that do not have the illness. So if you want to see if smoking affects lung cancer, you want to grab a group of people who maybe smoke, maybe don't smoke, but they have not developed lung cancers yet. So maybe you want to look at a group of people, maybe in their 20s and the 30s, maybe. The average age of lung cancer in Trinidad maybe is in the 50s or 60s. I'm just guessing. It might be so anecdotally. So when you do a cohort study, you should grab a group of people at an early point in the illness, right? So that is what you do. Take a group of people, apply some criteria, enroll them in this study, and you follow them up over time to see who's going to get sick or not. You have to ask, did they follow people long enough? If you have to look at heart disease, stroke, heart attack, cancer as the outcome, how long you have to follow people out to see if those things are going to happen? Yes, decades. You have to be hopeful that you as a researcher are still alive at the end of the study, right? If you're an old guy and you're as a researcher, then your patients might outlive you. So when you do cohort studies, usually they're done over a period of time. And they have many investigators looking at the people. So really, you have to follow up the people over a long period of time. You always ask, was the follow-up long enough? For these things, it don't happen in months. It don't happen in weeks. It takes years. It depends on what the outcome is. Now, again, it depends on things like cancer and heart disease. If the outcome you're looking at was if the person got an epidural hematoma, looking at people who come, they bounce their head, they hit their head, they come in casualty. And you want to do a cohort study to see risk factors for developing epidural hematoma. How long you follow up the people for? Who hit the head? 10 years? When the epidural will occur. Epidural is at least if you're looking at acute epidurals, not chronic subdural hematomas. If you're looking at acute epidural hematomas, what was the time period you're looking at? 24 hours, 48 hours, there's only an order of hours to days. And they have done this, guys. They have done cohort studies. So they look at people, hit the head, all right, measure all sorts of things on them, and then follow up everybody, do a CT scan to see who got the epidural. And that is how we know it have certain risk factors for intracranial injury. That is how we know. So this question depends on what the outcome is and what you're looking for. Some cohort studies could be done over weeks. Some could be done over hours or days. Some you have to do over decades. It depends on what the outcome is. And again, we see the word here blinding. Blinding applies to a cohort study. What do you think blinding or how blinding is used in a cohort study? Blinding means somebody don't know something. So for a cohort study, who don't know what? Exactly. So the person who has to determine the outcome does not know if the patient have the risk factor on. Right? So, and I can understand why that person should be blind to the person's risk factors, but they might be prejudiced to say, you smoke and you had a heart attack. You're sure you didn't have a heart attack? You're sure? You're sure? You're sure? Right? So the outcome person assessing the outcome should not know the risk factors. So look at this. A group of obese women was found to have an incidence rate of cervical cancer 5%. So 5% of obese women develop cervical cancer. Does that mean obesity causes cervical cancer? Even if I tell you the 5% was 80%, if I tell you 80% of obese women develop cervical cancer, does that mean obesity causes cervical cancer? No. What we need a comparison. We need a group of people who do not have obesity, and we need to look at that rate and make a comparison. Exactly. So this is generally what we do in cohort studies. We always have a comparison, an exposed and an unexposed. That's right. Now you would see this word subgroup analysis coming up even for cohort studies, because guess what they do? They analyze subgroups. So they would say something like, well, we didn't see a difference in people using a statin versus people not using a statin developing diabetes, but we saw a difference in a subgroup analysis of all the obese women. They want to know why does they do a subgroup analysis on all the obese women? They looked at everybody in general. So anytime you see a subgroup analysis, remember what coming after, take it with a pinch of salt, probably not very accurate, right? And you always have to ask yourself, well, why is the reporting on a subgroup? Subgroups are also prone to confounding. There are ways you could work around it statistically, but generally subgroup analyses are prone to confounding. And what are the outcomes over time? How much people are going to get sick? So what we calculate, if we look at the amount of people that get ill over the total to begin with in one group, and we look at the amount of people that get ill in the other group over the total amount, these we just said are incidence rates. And if we have two incidence rates, what we could do, we could make a ratio out of them. When we make a ratio out of two event rates, we call that relative risk. Sounds familiar? If your memory, your short-term memory covered the last, 4 weeks ago in this room, relative risk we spoke about for RCTs. So relative risk is also calculated for cohort studies. So the interpretation you could bet is the same. If the relative risk is 1, or includes the value 1, the confidence interval, it means the risk factor not associated with the outcome. If the relative risk is more than 1, it means the risk factor is making people sick. If the relative risk is less than 1, it means the risk factor is protective, less people getting sick. So the interpretation for relative risk for cohort study is the same interpretation as for RCT, but the design of the studies are completely different, right? The other statistic you would see being reported in literature, apart from relative risk, you could also see odds ratio. The interpretation is the same. You would also see hazard ratio, HR, hazard ratio. The interpretation of hazard ratio, odds ratio, and relative risk, they are all the same. The way they are calculated is a little bit different, but for your purposes, if you ever see hazard ratio, odds ratio, relative risk, the interpretation is just watching the CI to say, does it include the value 1? So, of course, this is the interpretation. This is what we just said, essentially, right? So, are the patients similar to our own? They seem like familiar questions? Yeah? So they all ask the same thing, right? If you notice, there are some questions that repeat in all the appraisals. It's the same kind of questions we ask when we do an appraisal. And right, advantages, disadvantages. So the good thing about a cohort study is you can look at multiple outcomes of a single risk factor. So if we pick smokers and non-smokers, we can look at cancer. What else we can look at as outcome? COPD, ischemic heart disease, sinusitis, lip cancer, throat cancer. We can look at many things. So the good thing about cohort studies, you could study multiple outcomes, right? It allows you to calculate incidence rates for disease. It indicates temporal sequence. Temporal sequence means time. It means the person had the risk factor first, then they get sick. Because as we'll see next week, one of the criteria for causation is that the person had the risk factor before the disease. A person can get lung cancer and then start to smoke after, and then you come and say, but is he smoking cause the lung cancer? The person start to smoke after. So temporal relationship means you as a researcher will show the risk factor was there before the person died, right? Which of course makes sense. Is useful for evaluating the effects of rare or unusual exposures, right? Meaning if you have some rare exposure, I don't know, something that the average citizen might not be exposed to. Let me just say I wanted to see if working in smelter plants is increased the risk of cancer, right? They've shown links, I think, between smelter plants and pancreatic CA, if I'm not mistaken. How do they know that? The people in the smelter plant, they realize this is a unique group. It's not probably much of the population working there, it's only a group of people. Let me follow them up and let me follow up a group of people in the village around the smelter plant in a separate area over time and see who wants to guess it. And that's how come they come up with these conclusions. Bad thing with cohort studies, you have to follow up over a long period of time and to look at plenty of people. So what do you think is going to happen? Lost the follow-up, people are going to drop out. After 10 years, the researcher calling you say, I fed up with all they calling them. I don't want to give you no information. Every time, every year they call in, they want to know if I have diabetes, if I develop diabetes. Every year they call in, they give me the 72 question, food question. I fed up with them. You want to hear what they say again. Right? So people fall out of the study. So lost the follow-up. And you could bet they're also very expensive. So they're very expensive. It takes a lot of effort to do it. They're not good for rare diseases. You all ever saw a case of Ray's syndrome in a child? No? One of my friends who did, she actually worked in emergency. She was working in emergency actually in Australia. Right? So she went to Australia and she got her a job and she worked in A&E in Australia. And she was like, when she did the class, she was like, yes, I saw a case of Ray's syndrome. Big population like Australia, plenty of people. Even if you follow up a group of children, you may follow up 1,000 children or 10,000 children. Even if some of them get aspirin, you're probably still not going to see Ray's syndrome because it is so rare. So the bad thing about a cohort study is it's not good for rare diseases. If you have a rare disease, you could probably follow up 100,000 people. Even if a condition is 1 in 100,000 and you follow up 100,000, you're probably still not going to see that one case. So that's the bad thing about the cohort study. They're not good for rare diseases. They're not good for diseases with long latency. Long latency means you have to smoke the cigarette for 30 years before you get the cancer. So if you want to follow up a person who's smoking a cigarette to see if smoking causes cancer, 10 years is not good enough. 20 years is not good enough. 25 years maybe you're now seeing cases. Right? So it's not good for long disease. And there's differential loss of follow-up. People who have the risk factor tend to lose more compared to the people who well. Right? Differential means there was a difference in the loss of follow-up. So these are just some advantages, disadvantages for cohort studies. Let me look at this example. Let me see if you all could work this out. So a researcher follows up 1,000 persons over time. 400 have hypertension, 600 don't have hypertension. Right? So you already know that is the exposure, having hypertension or not. And you want to know how much people are going to develop heart failure. That's the outcome. You want to see if hypertension is a risk factor for heart failure. In the hypertensive group, 40 develop heart failure, and 20 people in the normotensive group, so 20 out of the 600 people develop heart failure. What was the relative risk for developing heart failure in the hypertensives compared to the normotensives? So how will we work that out? Well, we have to work out. We have to work out first the incidence rates in each group, right? So go ahead, work that out. Work that out and let me see where I'll come up with. Right? So let me see where I'll come up with. And you can't look at numbers, right? You can't just look at numbers. You can't just say, well, 40 is more than 20. So clearly, more people get heart failure in the hypertensive group. It depends on what the denominator was. It depends on how much hypertensive people it was. That's why we have to work out incidence, right? So what you'll say is 40 out of 400. What is that? 40 out of 100, 400 is what? 0.1, 10%. And then you'll say what? 20 out of 600, which is 0.03, which is about 3%. So you have 10% and you have 3%. So then if you have to work out a relative risk, you divide one by the other. 10 divided by 3.3% is about 3. So the relative risk is 3. You all got that? Yeah. We go through a calculator. Right? Let me look at a calculator. Which I know they don't have any exam. Right? I know they don't have any exam. There's always time to chance. Well, we shall see. We shall see. Right? So, now the sad thing is some people might use the calculator and they might still get the thing wrong, you know.
I think we should do a cohort study.
Not a cohort study, a randomized controlled trial. Randomize a group to calculator use and randomize a group to no calculator use and compare pass rates in both groups. You could randomize the emergency department, but then that wouldn't be truly random. So the one I'm going to pick is what? Prospective study calculator. And what we're going to do is we're just going to put in the numbers, right? So in this case, when they say treated or not treated, what we're going to do? We have to treat a group as a treated, and we have to take that group as non-treated. So we can look at the hypertensives as the treated. So how much people in the hypertension group got sick? 40. And how much people had no outcome then? 360, right? 400 minus 40, correct? And how much people in the healthy group out of 600 got sick? 20. And so 20 from 600 is what? 580, right? And then when we hit get results, we're looking for a relative risk of 3. We hit get results and look the result here. And the confidence interval was 1.78 to 5.05. How do you interpret that? It don't have 1. So the relative risk confidence interval is 1.78 to 5.05. So that means it doesn't have 1, which means in this case, having hypertension was statistically significantly associated with developing heart failure. Right? Which is from research that is done and from doing calculations like that, which is why we knew it's a risk factor. That's how we know hypertension could lead to heart failure. Right? So this is the basic calculation. So of course we're not treating people with hypertension. We're not treating people here with hypertension and not treating people with hypertension, but it's the same concept because it's the same kind of measurement, right? So remember we say we could use the same calculator for RCT, but clearly when we do this example here, this was not a RCT example. We're looking at people already with a risk factor. And this is in a nutshell what cohort studies do. Yeah, so that's all I have to say about cohort.